Good afternoon. Time Flies by Dennis Beck, MHS 76. Thanks, Dennis, for our intro song. Lyndall Fraker coming to you again today with Marshfield Old School Times. Got a longtime friend here, knew the boy when he was born or right after.
Yeah,
and
may have
his
been there, but I
family,
have no recollection.
his brother and sister, his folks. Champ Herren, welcome, Champ.
Well, thank you, Lyndall.
Good
Appreciate
good to have you with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, absolutely. His self-professed title on Facebook is farmer, sometimes writer, contrarian, and storyteller. So that pretty much sums up, Champ, maybe what you're about.
Well, good. We can leave.
It'll be interesting, I assure you that. Champ's got the Heron Dry Creek Farm out here south of Marshfield. I guess that's family farm, been the family for a long time, hasn't it?
Yes, my grandfather was fearing another depression after the World War II boom, and he wanted to be where he experienced the one in the 20s, and he wanted a place where he could have basically be able to support himself. And my father started farming when he was 15.
There you go.
So.
And it's was it already called the Dry Creek Farm, or did you name it?
No,
that?
originally it was the Rabenaugh Stonehouse Stock Farm. Henry Rabenaugh was a Pennsylvania German, what they call Dutch, who came from Pennsylvania, and he had been at Rolla for many years, and he had made a lot of money during the war. He was a Union Army veteran, and he bought 1,800 acres down on Dry Creek.
Okay. Wow.
And
that's like 3 sections.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't all laid out that way.
Yeah.
But it was in 1950 or 49-50. Our family bought half, and the Carrick family bought the other half of the last remaining. And we have the house. So
awesome. And you all moved to that house here a few years ago from town.
Yeah,
that's great. So we're going to kind of start at the beginning here. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Marshfield, your family, your folks, your siblings, and then, of course, later on, your wife Sarah and the children and so forth. Let's talk
Sure,
a little bit like
Well,
you want to.
I don't know how to really start other than I was just donated to the community as a small child and just sort of set loose. That's sort of the family story. I walked to school by the time I was in first grade. We lived on Olive Street down the hill from Holy Trinity, just north of there. And I walked up Locust Street all the way, about, good distance you wouldn't let a 7-year-old do that now. But they threw me out the door and said, "Here, have it." And so when I got a bicycle, I was told not to go any further than the spur. And
because you might have went to Springfield.
I might have. Well, my father rode his bicycle to Bennett Springs when he was 12, so I had a really good example to follow.
Something tells me he was probably sort of a character like you were as a child.
Quieter.
Was he quieter?
I think he was quieter.
Well, I knew his mother, Mrs. Herren, and she was a sweet lady. I do know that.
Yes, she was a very. She was one of my best friends. Truly.
Yeah. So you this would have been the mid '80s, right, when you were riding your bike and or walking to school.
Yeah.
And your mother was somewhat older for a new mother. I mean, she had 2 children several years before, right?
Yeah, and she'll tell you what I weighed and what condition I was in when I got there and everything else. Doesn't matter where we are, she'll tell it.
So is Doug and Julie 15 years older than you?
Julie is 15 and Doug is 19.
19, right? Yeah. So okay. Well, what else did you, in your childhood around Marshfield? Obviously, we all rode our bikes around the square, went to the show. Well, the show may have already been closed by the time you came along.
No, we didn't have a show.
Right.
So I was kept, a lovely couple kept me from the time I was about 8 months old, maybe even younger than that. Barbara, you can type in the comments below exactly when it happened. They kept me down on Crittenden Street, and I was right across the street from Buck and Mary Day, and right next door to the Spinabella Apartments. And I saw all kinds of things happen, and I got to know what was fortuitous about that is 2 things. There was great big ditches going down either side, and they were an endless place to explore, and there was basically you could get in there and crawl around, and you might not ever get out, but you could go back out up to the square.
Stormwater ditches.
Right. The Bill Spinabella Apartments are an old quarry, they have a basement, and there's a big rock wall back. It's all covered over now, but you could see it back then. And Don Hargis's parents, Stanley and Louise Selva, kept me, and their house was the site of the first black school in Marshfield.
Okay, yeah.
And so I was digging up stuff all the time because they did. I'm kind of like a little tornado. If I'm directed, I'll just, go, kind of like the Tasmanian devil, particularly at that age. And so they put me to work digging out stumps or whatever to keep me busy. And Ellis Jackson shop was across the street. Marion Corbett, my grandfather's legal secretary, was in the building, and I spent a lot of time with her.
That was where the little tea house is, right? Or
No.
was it? No.
No, where the apartments were. She lived in the apartments. Okay. Bill Spinabella's mother was an Italian, and she lived on the other side.
Yeah.
And she had big flower beds, and I spent some time with her. And that was a very interesting place to be. I threw rocks at Ken Clifton across the road when she was visiting her grandparents. And that was a very interesting place to be because it was old. It had been wiped out during the cyclone. And you couldn't dig anywhere without finding something. And
just the quarry being there would have.
Well, yeah, and it was like, to a little kid, that was like a sheer cliff. I mean, if you fell off that thing, you were a goner.
I remember David Magoon's backyard was cavernous. I mean, it was a big old hole for years and years, and then they finally started filling it in.
Yeah, and I wonder what's in there. And there's a spring that comes down that ditch. We were talking.
And this isn't the Shackleford spring. This is a different spring.
No,
yeah.
There's springs all on that breakaway and that brings us to, there's layers of sandstone and probably layers of limestone that outcrop along there. They're a lot of the first buildings, the rock was quarried around the square underneath there. The Robertson Block building, you could see it. It was that red sandstone that
a lot of old foundations were laid in that cut square rock stone around
it
town.
Came off in sheets. It was easy to work.
Yeah,
it had natural faults you could exploit.
And there were some other springs too. That one and the Shackleford, and then on down the park, and different ones.
Well, and then you get over into Hidden Waters Park.
Yep.
That's a bunch of springs over in there. There's springs that come out. My father and I identified over 10 at one point that where watercress would grow. We could find.
And being the headwaters of at least 4 rivers that we always have heard, that's generally how rivers start, or with springs. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
The gutters of the courthouse make 4 rivers, depending on which corner it is.
Yeah, that's for sure. Your mom was obviously a very successful real estate agent and began her career back probably a few years prior to that.
Yeah, pioneer.
She was, and I know she just recently received an award in the Springfield Greater Realtor Association. I think one of only 3 ladies that have ever received this award, like Carol Jones and someone else. So that's a very, very prestigious award to receive. I do know that.
Yes, it is. It is, and it's it's a long career.
Yeah.
It's a long career serving the public. Of course, I grew up like Doug and Julie, going around, maybe more so. If we had an afternoon, Sunday afternoon, wasn't any hobby or anything fun, we went and looked at property. And I hated it because I'd rather been digging ditches, honestly, than doing that.
And that's why you dig on the farm now, and you're not selling real estate. I'm assuming.
I'm just moving it one shovel at a time. So, but yeah, the point is that was good because I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about these old houses in town and different things, and a lot of stuff that hopefully use one day.
Now go back just a little bit further too. Your grandparents, we talked briefly about your grandmother Herren, and then your grandpa Herren was an attorney, correct?
Yes. He came here in, he was stricken with polio as a very young man and crippled in both the hands and the arms. Gradually regained use of his arms. He was a talented musician. Played the piano, played the saxophone, played in a pit orchestra for a silent movie back in the day. Yeah, his father was a physician, and they had moved around the Midwest from North Missouri to Corpus Christi, Texas, and to Sioux City, Iowa, and another place in Iowa as well, where he practiced. He was a surgeon. Ended up in Springfield. My grandfather had because he was bedridden for a number of years, graduated high school when he was 16, and graduated college when he was 20, graduate of Missouri State Teachers College, now Missouri State University. And he read law and took the bar.
Wow.
Basically.
That's awesome. That would have been in what, maybe the 30s?
He's right at the tail end of when they allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
They cut that off in like 33 or 34, 35, somewhere there.
Yeah. And then eventually became a judge, correct?
Yes. So he got here, and he ran for prosecuting attorney. And that's a wonderful thing, Lyndall. I never knew he ran for prosecuting attorney, and if Dad mentioned it, I didn't know. But on newspapers.com, I found that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a kind of, and where Ballard Waters wrote an article welcoming them to the town,
right?
Different things.
And so, if this was in the 30s, that would have been about the time that Mr. Fian was our state representative, and of course, the Democrats controlled the whole state in those days. And
well, in 32 and 36, the Republicans were out like Lottie's eye.
Yeah, there just wasn't any. When you look at the pictures, I happen to have one picture up here. That's a picture of the house in Missouri. Prior to that, that's more like the turn of the century. But you look at those pictures and you look at the party affiliation, and there's just a handful of Republicans. It was all Democrats, and of course out in the rural areas especially. But it would be interesting to think that the same families, sort of, your grandpa and Mr. Fian, I mean, all the heirs are still around, still prominent in the community, and I think that's interesting. And then on your mother's side, she was a Dugan. And tell us a little bit about those grandparents.
Well, so the Dugans are one of the first families to come here, just after the initial the setup, my the survey of Marshfield. They were already coming here, and
predominantly the Elkland area, wasn't it?
My great grandfather George William Dugan. He was one that kept the railroad from coming to. It said we won't bond to build the railroad through the county. We'll let them build it.
Oh, I see.
Buffalo got in a lot of trouble over that.
Yeah, Buffalo never did get a railroad.
No, largest town in America without a railroad.
Right. That's right.
So he put a stop to that nonsense. But the Dugans were an old family and married with the Kingses and the Hameses and the McNabbs.
Northern Webster County families.
Sure. And my grandmother, his end of Dugan ended up going down to Seymour. And Grandpa Dugan quit school in 8th grade and went to work on the farm. And his aunt convinced him she'd buy him a car if he'd go finish high school. Thought he was bright. And he did, and he married my grandmother, who was 4 years younger than him.
And that was Hester.
That was Hazel.
Hazel, yeah.
Hester was his brother's wife.
Right, yes. Well, I knew them both.
Aunt Hester was a hoot.
Hester and her husband went to Ebenezer Church. My grandparents went to Ebenezer in those days. But your grandmother Hazel went to the Baptist Church, I'm assuming. So Mr. Dugan was a teacher then at Marshfield later on. And many of us, I didn't actually have him. I think he maybe retired just a year or two ahead of me. But my brother had him, and many that graduated in the early 70s had him. And was a very, very likable guy. Another quick anecdote with Clifton. Your brother Doug, his first vehicle was Clifton the pickup.
Yeah.
His granddad's old pickup. Yeah. And I rode around many a night after football games with your brother Doug. And
did you steal the horse?
No, we might have smoked a cigar or two, but I didn't ever steal.
You didn't steal Wayne Biggs' concrete horse and set it on Bill Simms's.
You think I would?
Or was it Don Cheever's porch? Who'd they?
Oh yeah, I'm not.
I guess they went.
I wouldn't admit it if I did.
Yeah, I didn't paint the sign. I just held the bucket.
I do know a little bit about the Berger family on the overpass, but that was a few years later.
So. I don't know about that.
Yeah, you weren't born yet, probably.
Well, it's probably just as well. But the Douglas took Wayne Biggs' concrete horse, and I can't remember if they set it on Bill Simms's porch or Don Cheever's porch with a stocking hat.
Oh my goodness! No, I did not know that one. That's a good one. Is that one of the horses that had been at the Buena Vista Motel. Or the horse motel? I think Biggs may have got it. I don't know. I was thinking it came from Buena Vista before it was the Animal Paradise.
Moving a horse in that old truck would have been a problem enough. A concrete horse would have been twice the trouble.
The Berger family was fiberglass. It wasn't that difficult, but yeah. So moving on.
There's a story.
Yeah. So you get into high school. Then we talked a little bit about your childhood and growing up north of the square. Tell us about high school. I know one time I heard one story about you that I'll recall. Because Melanie and I hadn't been married very long, and I think seems like you were in the youth group at church, and and some of the kids were talking about they had quite a revolting development because you had tried to work on the breaker box, and maybe there was a play and something went through. And
no, that was up at the high school.
Oh, okay,
that was up at the high school.
Yeah, it was at the high school, but the youth group was telling her about it or something.
Well, what happened is there was an access panel, and they had a outlet hanging down from it, and it was numbered. And I thought, well, we need that plug-in fixed, and so I just went down through the breaker.
Mm-hmm.
And unbeknownst to me, there was Romax just running sideways every which way. There was no way to turn it off. So then I welded a screwdriver to the box. Yeah.
You didn't need a Lincoln 225 arc.
There wasn't a no.
You're darn lucky you didn't weld your hand to it.
I'm so glad I agreed to do this and you brought that up.
You wasn't going to get off scot-free. Okay. You knew that.
No, it just I just went around and I unscrewed all the things and I just took the screwdriver and I just brought that thing down. All right, stuck her up there and she stayed stuck and welded in place.
But you didn't have a big fire or anything.
No,
nothing like that. No, that's what I mean. So it was just
we'd
harmless.
I've been telling the story myself if we'd have had a big fire.
Harmless fun.
Wasn't too harmless when you think about it.
No, it really wasn't. What else about high school can you recall? You had a pretty good group. I know you had them in here a few months ago. You did a little tour of the school, and it was really a good time. I was able to visit with some of them, and you had a really good group of kids. You graduated.
Our class is very unique. We're one of the smallest classes, rather than before us or even after us. And I don't know. I don't have a way to really put a handle on that. But we're pretty tight.
Yeah.
And
you've done fundraisers for fellow graduates and so forth.
We have. And we've taken up collections when nobody knows about it either, just because there was a need there.
Right. We
enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
And I know there's classes that absolutely, they're my age. I'm not speaking about any other than my own group, that detest one another.
Yeah.
And they don't want to get together. And they can't even imagine that. And we're like, well, we need to go to dinner.
Really, you're exactly right. It's really interesting. That would be a great study for someone on social, atmosphere, because you do have some classes that are really close and some that aren't. And you would think there would be a lot of similarities, but we had a pretty tight class as well. But then there's some that, like even with Reunion Fest, that, boy, they pull together. They have great turnouts. They're anxious. And then you have some that,
and see, we don't go to your reunion fest because we do our own thing.
Yeah, well, but many of you go and attend individually. You may not, but now this is your 30th year too this year coming up, by the way. You probably hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it is next year.
Yeah, coming next summer. Anything else from school days before we move on?
Not really. I had an opportunity, I think, to get a very good education here, and I learned how to. I learned the oddest things that I kept with me. I learned how to weld, and I learned how to read, and I learned how to write, and I learned how to study and take that and try to put it together. I've never been one to say that hard physical work and intellectual activities are a complete fork in the road. I've never been able to disconnect them. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy every day to go out and slay 50 or 60 cedar trees and work just like, and then sit down and go and read and start working on one of our other projects.
But Champ, don't you think, I mean, I've been to your parents' house. I've seen the library, the books. Yeah. I suspect that you're somewhat of a protege of both your mom and your dad. Your mother's a hard worker and very successful. Your dad the same way, and yet he also, I'm sure, was well read. but went to the farm on the weekends. And so,
Sure.
you know, yes, I think we all got a great education at Marshfield. Part of that was in culture, not academic, but the culture of our schools and our, you know, what we did with each other. But it still starts at home.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion.
Well, my father had read, and the annoying thing about him, I've read books 3 and 4 times, and he'd read it once and had it.
Yeah.
You know.
Was he an engineer?
Not really. Not technically.
I know he had.
He didn't ever graduate college.
Yeah.
But
he worked at Show Me Power.
He did it.
That.
He made 2 or 3 stabs at it, and he never quite got there. Then he went to work for M&A, Matthews and Associates in Springfield, and he was farmed out to Show Me. He went around inspecting where they was building airports and different things for a long time.
I see. And
then he got farmed out to Show Me, and the A-frame substation, that's his baby.
That's his deal.
He saw something similar in Europe, and him and Uncle Carl drew that out at the kitchen table out there at the farm.
Well, you got quite a legacy there, that's for sure. And then your brother and sister not too bad either. They've been pretty successful as well.
We try not to talk about them, but they're all right.
Yeah.
I guess. No,
well, after school, you went to college.
Yeah.
And MSU, I think.
Went to MSU. Had no idea what I wanted to do. Wanted to be thought I wanted to be an Army officer, but I can't see, can't hear, and I got a twisted back. So that really kind of went sideways on the physical.
Right. And then not soon after, I guess not long after you got married, you've got the boys.
The twins, Kenny and Klein, who are 20 this next February.
Wow.
And twins. And they have, Klein is working at OTC. Well, he's not working at OTC. He's tending OTC, and he's in a medical fellowship to be a surgical tech.
Wow.
And he wants to continue his education with the goal of being a doctor. Kenny is working as a mechanic in St. Louis. He opted not for school and has found a nice family-owned business in Florissant, and he is working there.
Wow.
And had enough grit and sand to go out on his own and try that. Not without a lot of kicking and screaming and mistakes and problems, but we got her done.
Good deal. Then you married Sarah.
Yes, and we had immediately got a super stepson, Alex, and then had Audrey.
Right. Yeah. How old's Audrey now?
Audrey is 10.
Yeah,
I'll be 11 this February.
Pretty much runs things.
Yeah. I'm just going to retire here in another few years and just let her.
I see a lot of pictures where she's teaching you or vice versa, about the farm and.
Yeah, I get an earful.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't cleaned something up.
Speaking of the farm, tell us a little bit about the farm.
Well, the farm has always been my first passion. I feel that farming is what I was always more or less called to do. And I'm a big believer in 2 things. First of all, nature pretty well has an answer to whatever ill you want to conceive. And secondly, that farmers should really look at retail. Now, that can be spread just as wide and thin as you want it, or keep it fairly close. So we sell lambs to individuals who, cut up, ready to go, shrink wrapped, chickens, Thanksgiving turkeys, eggs. We have some beef that we'll be finishing here, and we're not heavy on inputs. Our poultry's raised with non-GMO and natural grain. Our lamb and beef is grass and mineral water.
Yeah.
Sunshine.
And of course, you have the store, the Penny Pincher store.
Yes.
Sarah, I assume, kind of runs that.
Sarah runs that, and
which is a great outlet for your products too.
Well, there you go. You can't quite do that. You can't quite do that. There's something everybody should look at called the Prime Act in Congress that would allow greater discretion in meat sales in a local market from a local farm, sort of like you're allowed to do with poultry now. And I think that could be very exciting. Very exciting.
And we may be headed there.
Well, I think we're headed
globally eventually.
We're going to have to.
Yeah. Of course, it would be difficult, I would assume, to make a living doing that if you didn't have other.
Sure, I retired.
Yeah.
And
Tell us about your other career.
well, so many years ago, I went in the insurance business. Started with New York Life Insurance Company and learned a lot there, and didn't quite think that was a market we wanted to be in, and so went to work with Kerry Proctor, Band of Benham Associates on the west side of the square at the time, and got a real taste for that, and got a taste for the Medicare business, and then ended up with McNerney Management Group in Columbia, Missouri. And worked great, and helped them build an already large sales organization, even bigger. Built a large business for ourselves, and we were working in 7 or 8 states last time when I left, and so it was kind of a rewarding work. But I really had to get outside.
Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't do it.
So you're totally out now.
Well, I'm retired. I go in there and piddle if they need something.
I see.
But basically, I get in their way.
Yeah.
I go in there.
I see. Yeah. And you still own the building on the east side of the square where the offices, the family, where it's located.
Yeah.
Well, you were very fortunate to do that well and retire at your young age. I mean, really, that's a testament to your work ethic and making things work. So
Thank you.
Congratulations for that. I haven't retired yet, so.
Oh, I haven't retired.
Well, that's true.
I have redeployed.
Yeah, exactly. So, moving forward a little bit more, Champ, then I think we want to spend some time talking about kind of what your interests are. I know you've got a very eclectic repertoire of interests, ranging from Civil War reenactments to tales from the crypt, I call it, urban legends. I know you're really interested in certain books and writers, and probably doing some writing yourself. So why don't you just kind of start us down that path, wherever you want to take us? And I think people would be very interested to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Part of growing up down there on Crittenden Street, and part of growing up around town and hanging out with all the old men selling watermelons on the Spur Drive or wherever, I became a collector of tales in time and place. And God, if I'd have written it down, we'd have 5 volumes.
That's why we're doing what we're doing now.
But I have a pretty good recall, and spent a lot of time with really kind of asking questions about stuff that other people would have rather forgot about. You know, one of my favorite stories, and something we're working on, is the murder of Clifford Vere Shaw, which I think is the proper title rather than the lynching of that wretch Dick Cullen. Happened on the square. There's not a lot known about that. And I bring this up. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I'm talking about it to make a point. We have something, and you can find it in the Floyd Water George book. You can find it in various sources.
Now, just so the audience knows, the Floyd Waters George book is the historic Webster County book that was written in the 50s, I think, just prior to the centennial.
Yes.
Floyd Waters was Jack Waters' aunt, and a very well-written document at that time of the history of our county. Of course, now we're another 60 plus years on top of that on the county, but 05 to
55.
Almost 70.
70.
But anyway, it's well done, and so this particular story you're talking about was a famous murder that occurred.
Well, it basically, and I'm gonna write a lot more on it. I found a lot about it. This fella figured he was going to be disinherited, and he threw a baby in a well. And it was a very heinous thing, and ended up the people of Marshfield lynched him right there on the east side of the square, right across from my office. And which...
Was this in the teens, maybe?
No, it was 1892.
1892, okay.
Now, I bring this up because I got to investigating this, and I ended up with a subscription to newspapers.com. Because I could find information about the Dick Cullen lynching. I just didn't have access to it. So I went in and paid the fee and got the subscription. And I started finding out Dick Cullen's been in trouble elsewhere. He was suspected in a big killing and other heinous act up in Nebraska, Seward County, Nebraska. He goes up and gives testimony and walks away. I'm trying to get the testimony unsealed so I can look at it, because really we don't have a whole lot of biographical data on him.
Now, was he a stepson of the
stepson
mother of the baby?
Okay, so Hiram Shaw was married to Sarah Shaw, and I'm not sure how this worked, but she left her husband in Wisconsin and came with this old man who had an orchard and came to Missouri and brought her daughters with her. I don't know what happened. I'm trying to explore that angle too, but they ended up here, and then the son showed up later, and the son was a criminal. And
so he wasn't her son. He was the other.
He was her son.
He was her son.
Yeah, Dick Cullen. She was a Cullen.
So this baby was his half.
This baby was found on the doorstep of Oliver Wells in 1888, who was the postmaster.
Oh, okay.
And Oliver Wells the baby ended up staying with the Shaw family.
I see. Okay.
And Mr. Shaw was going to officially adopt the child about 4 years of age.
I see.
The point is, I thought we had the story on this, and there's so much story here that I found. A lot more. Yeah. Yes.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah. If you want to make a movie about somebody throwing babies down wells, I guess. But
there's a lot.
They make movies about worse.
Well, I know the pictures in there of the baby in the casket, and I always thought that, or is it the guy that they hung? No, yeah, both of them. Yeah, both. Show him hanging. And as a kid, I that book was on the bookshelf at my grandparents' home, and can remember those pictures vividly as a kid, seeing those.
So
pretty impactful.
I'm gonna turn this.
Yeah, if you stick it up real close, they can kind of see.
Well, that's Dick Cullen. He was in his glare.
Yeah.
He was in his underwear when he was lynched, and they dressed him and took him over and hung him in I think Lazarus Nichols' photo studio. I think that's right. I'll have to look. And they lynched him again on a rafter and photographed him.
Yeah.
And there's a write-up in the Marshfield Chronicle about taking him to be buried. I guess they all got good and liquored up and made an awful commotion going to the cemetery.
Have you ever seen his grave?
Well, that's the thing. So Earl Shields showed Dad and I where he thought, and I'm going to say he was pretty sure, where Clifford Vere Shaw was buried. Dick Cullen was buried in the pauper section.
Okay.
And it's unmarked.
That's northwest.
If you come out tonight to the cemetery tour, you can learn. Hey, we almost forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a cemetery tour at 4 and 6 this evening.
It's going to be a beautiful evening.
No, not 4. 4 is when we're getting there to get organized. 5 and 6 this evening. Look on Facebook at the Webster County Historical Society, and we can get you that. But
what's tragic about the cemetery and those old graves is all those stones. So many were destroyed.
There weren't stones.
By vandals.
There
may not have been there, but there's a lot of stones,
markers,
missing,
rocks
that vandals have. I can remember as a kid, every now and then there'd be another story in the paper, another story around town. Well, they hit the cemetery again and busted some more headstones.
Sure, and we've taken out trees.
Yep.
And there were rocks, and I think I try to go out there and look at where Earl told Dad and I that was. Well, I was maybe 8 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's been over 40 years ago, so I am not sure that I have a good memory of where. But the paupers section is when you go in the entrance, the main gate, the first entrance, and you go up and you go down, and then you make that curve back around. There's an open spot. That's pretty well the paupers section.
Okay.
Right there.
There's also a section that I always heard was the north. That same road, the very northwest corner up there is where they took bodies from the cyclone and did a mass grave. I don't know if that's true.
I've heard that, and I don't know that that's so. I think a lot of the... so you have the cemetery just north of the square, too. Oh, I bet you didn't know about that.
I did not.
Yeah, the little park on Clay Street.
Oh, yes.
There was a cemetery there.
Yeah, I knew there was a stone or two there. I did know that.
They're not... Well, there's just a marker now.
Okay.
Now, I've heard that there were cyclone victims buried there
Buried
as
there.
well.
Which would have made sense. There was a lot of victims in that part of town.
Maybe.
For sure.
May have been.
Interesting.
But the point is you can find, I have a better opportunity to find these historical markers on a story like that than I ever have had.
Yes. Yes.
And that's exciting. That's exciting.
The tools we have today with Ancestry.com and all the different things that are available with the internet. I mean, it is amazing.
Ancestry, Find a Grave, and
Yeah.
and newspapers.com, and you can really triangulate where you're heading.
Right. What else?
Well, probably if we look into lore, about lore in the area, in my lifetime. Now, I would love it if we had a haunted mill or a haunted bridge or a ghost that repeatedly haunted some place and we could go visit. It'd lend some ambience to the countryside, but we don't. What we do have is we have a story about a large cavern that supposedly, or maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, exists under Marshfield. And it's supposed to connect the courthouse, old and new, with the Rathbun building, and it's supposed to connect all the way out to Hosmer Hill and all the way out west of town, out by Chet and Bill's. It's supposed to tie in to here and there. Now, I've heard that. You've heard that.
I have. Yeah.
And I ran into Linda Dickinson before I came over here, and she'd heard about it. I said, you've heard that. Oh, yeah, it's supposed to be everywhere. Well, what's the truth to it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I know that there was a cave in behind Herman Pierce's house on Pine that was filled in that parking lot area that the county now uses. I know there was a cave there. I know that I would assume that there's a cave where Shackleford Spring comes out of some kind out on that hill because there's water flowing. There are, there was a cave at Howard Filmer's place. There was a straight shaft that went down up on that hill up where his apple orchard was.
Okay, and that cave supposedly connected, and there was an opening, and I've been in this opening because when we were boys, we would go down in it a ways, not real far, and it would have been further west than Howard's home, but it would be the same cave. It was just an opening and that may be the same opening you're referencing.
This was just a shaft. Dad and Carl told me about it.
This was between Blair Street, which is by AutoZone coming down, and it was north, or maybe right about where Jefferson comes back through by behind Price Cutter.
Maybe
it's right in that area. Yeah, it could be the same one, but that one we used to play over there, and
I don't know.
They filled it in because they were worried about kids, going too far.
I'm pretty sure Dad said Howard Filmer owned it. He may own more property over there at one point.
Well, he could have. This was a little further west than what I thought Howard's property was. See, my grandparents developed that part of the Fraker edition, and so it was actually originally on their land, but then they sold lots, as that developed, Fraker Street and Jameson Street and all so forth. But anyway, that definitely there is a cave over there, and it was filled in.
Well, Uncle Carl and Dale Hyde got on a rope and went down in it when they was probably freshmen in high school or a little younger, and my grandma and Louise both threw a fit.
Yeah.
Going down.
The opening that I recall going in did not go straight down. It may have once you got back there a ways, but you could walk in it, and there was guys would scratch their names on the wall and so forth. But then it got small, and so I never went beyond that. Supposedly there's fellas that did, but I never went any further. It could be the same cave, just another outlet.
I found when we were building the Callaway cabin Indian artifacts at Hidden Waters. I'd love to, if that thing was still existed, it'd be something to go dig it out and see what was there.
I'd forgotten that you were very instrumental in the Callaway cabin project. You called me one time needing some beams to go under it or something.
Yeah. I was cribbaging lumber from anywhere I could get it.
Yeah, that's turned out to be a great project, and what an asset to the park and to Marshfield for sure. So urban legends,
the cave.
folklore.
If someone has information or a story to share on the cave, I'm going to start collecting those.
I would love to hear more about the. You can find me on Facebook at Klein Heron, or we're launching a new page, Ozark Magic and Folklore Revisited, which is going to focus on tracking down and revisiting some of the time, people, and places that Vance Randolph wrote about. Vance Randolph, the Ozark folklorist, wrote Ozark Magic and Folklore, Ozark Superstition. Of course, most people are familiar with his more famous work, Pissing in the Snow, which is all the body stuff that he never thought he'd live long enough to print. Then the 70s came along, and he said, what the heck? And there you go.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to bring a lot of those stories, traditional Ozark tales, back to life. It's a project we've been working on in one form or another for 25 or more years.
That's interesting. That's great.
And I want to collect new stuff, though, too. So if you have a particular Marshfield legend or a ghost story or something, let us know. If you want to be anonymous, we'll keep you anonymous.
Well, I can think of a couple that you might touch upon. The Northview Lights.
Well, yes. And, I never saw the UFOs, and I never saw the woman in white who crossed the road in front of people and scared the bejesus out of folks. But I'll tell you, I had it in a much younger form. I had some friends who were ghost hunters, and they wanted to explore Northview Hill, and I was just convinced it was haunted anyhow, up there where the old service station was. And so we didn't get permission or anything. In case anybody's curious, we just snuck out there and did it. And they set up equipment, different spots. And it was a real soft night, warm fall night. And we stayed out there till about 4 a.m. And other than deer moving through there, didn't see or hear a thing.
Yeah.
And it started to rain. I said to the fellas, I'm done. I got to go to work tomorrow. Let's chuck it. We got everything loaded up in my car, and we were standing there, and he says, boys, it's just a shame we didn't see anything. And across the road where they've just cleared out, the full length of that, I saw a light. Now, not a orb or anything I could identify. It looked like somebody welding, and it was white and blue with gold and red. It was maybe the size of a volleyball, and it wasn't like somebody shot something. It went along at a quick pace, about as fast as a man could run through the woods, and ended up on it. And I was close enough. It lit up the whole woods. There wasn't anybody carrying it. There wasn't anybody around. It lit up the whole wooded area. And he was fumbling with his camera, and this took 8 or 9 seconds to go that full length. He couldn't get his camera to work, naturally, of course. And I said, you know what? That just proves it. I don't need to investigate anymore. But people say, well, the UFOs, they were nothing but light refracting around the surface of the earth.
The Joplin spook lights for headlights on the interstate.
Yes.
So
well, there's a problem with that. I've had people who tell me when in horse and wagon days, they saw that thing in the woods.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it is. I think it's probably some static electrical phenomenon that appears, but it's a curiosity nonetheless. Yeah. And if you've heard about it or you know something, you have a good story to share, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the lady in white, allegedly, a lady had gotten married and was a newlywed, and then jumped off the quarry. When the quarry was not developed, I mean, it had been a quarry when they built the interstate, and then it was shut down for a long time, and there was a small cavern there, and I remember it was filled with water. The bottom, it was old murky, nasty water, but a young lady jumped into the quarry, or was pushed, or was thrown in. I think that's the legend.
But she was, and I've heard she was spurned by her intended, or he was killed in another.
Yes,
maybe
something
in the war
occurred,
or something.
and certainly the local funeral home, I know I mean, it was a factual thing that she did die, and they extracted the body and so forth, and then the family had her buried in her wedding dress. And the urban legend is that for many years that people would come from Springfield at night driving to Marshfield, and you would see the lady running in her white wedding dress running across the overpass if, at a certain point. And of course, some would say that, well, it was some kind of reflection of headlights coming from the other direction or whatever, or headlights coming from the south at the Northview four-way stop or whatever. But that's the other part of that story.
I always kind of figured it was somebody in gauze out there running across the highway.
Could have been. But and I know there's viewers on probably today that remembers that particular urban legend.
I would have been in grade
probably
school.
Have more information than we have about it.
Yes, I would have been in like 6th or 7th grade.
Yeah.
I won't call you out. I know who you are out there, and you're my friend on Facebook, and you did see it. At least your kid told all around school you saw it. So come on, let us know what you saw.
So you've also have a keen interest in quite a few writings and certain art authors that kind of continue to spark interest. Do you want to talk about some of those books? And
sure. Of course, Vance Randolph is one of my greats, and Randolph was an outlander who came to very remote sections of the Ozarks and started collecting under the guise of collecting folk songs. Ended up going around and collecting a lot of other lore, everything from, like referred to, the body stories with all the different content that's not polite company content, and then down to things like ghost stories of witchcraft, stories of plant signs and weather signs and animal signs, things that in many ways would be a life or death situation you were trying to determine. Because if a drought happens, or if you can prepare for a drought, you're better off.
Well, they were the old timers meteorologists, is what they were. I mean, I work around the Amish, and I tell you, there's a lot of those things that they use to help them with their farm life, and we've all recalled, growing up and family members that were farmers planting by the sign or castrating by the sign or whatever. I mean,
cut timber by the sign.
There's a lot of that, and I think there's a lot of truth that goes into a lot of that. I mean, the way
there may very well be.
Earth is,
But if you have an argument,
axis or something.
If you have an argument with your neighbor because your mule got in and tore up her cabbage patch, and she draws a big circle and a cross in it and spits in the middle of it, and you get a toothache, you ain't going to assume they're connected. You're going to assume she's crazy.
Yeah.
And that you didn't get a toothache wished upon you.
It's kind of like.
But there was, in lack of a better answer, a supernatural one you can make use of a supernatural explanation.
It's always a fallback.
Yeah, and a catch-all. I mean, it works.
Yeah, exactly. So I was out at Walgreens, matter of fact, just this morning, and they have a set of this series of books, The Images of America. We talked about this when Caitlin McConnell was on, because Caitlin did this one for Marshfield. It's a great book. But the reason I'm bringing that up, I noticed there's other books in this series, Images of America, many on folklore and haunted houses and all kinds of things. I didn't realize it until our discussion we had this week, and then noticing that they happen to have some of those. So there's all kinds of literature out there, and these books all pertain to the Ozarks, various things around the Ozarks. So I'm sure those would be great references if someone wanted to study.
They are, and I have, if you boil down the top 20 Ozark ghost books or Missouri ghost books, you end up with about the same 40 or 50 stories told differently.
Oh, yeah.
And that's great. That's great because they're out there. And I want to focus on some of these that haven't, for one thing, the Joplin spook light's something that has not had any work done on it lately, really. I'd like to talk about my nephew Jared Crawford's helping me with this, and my good friend Todd Wilkinson, and we want to do some work on the Yoakum Dollar. We want to do some work on Dead Man's Pond at Reed Springs, and some more lore, different things, treasure stories and the like.
Do you have any information on the Devil's Den at Fordland?
Okay, so Devil's Den's like saying Blue Spring. You can go over the Ozarks and you can find probably 20 Devil's Dens. Colloquial name, not, but we've got what I think's the official one.
Right.
But what happens is you get some of these where they write about Devil's Den, and there's a Devil's Den in Sylamore, Arkansas, I believe. There's Devil's Den here and there. And what happens at that Devil's Den becomes all the same story.
Sure.
So I want to sort out on our Devil's Den what exactly the story is. There are all kinds of creepy stories about Devil's Den.
Yeah.
And I think most of them are just stories.
Right. Well, aside from the haunted stories or the folklore, what other Webster County history that you found interesting in your studies?
Well,
like even in the
so-
Floyd Waters book or other.
So one thing that I happened on many years ago, and I never had an opportunity to do it because we didn't have access to the Marshfield Chronicle. This is the Mary Hartman, Elmo Ingenthron book on the ball knobbers.
Okay.
There have been several books on the ball knobbers. I'm not going to say one's better than the other one, but what it does do is it shows that in 1887, ball knobber activity in Webster County was on the rise. So after all the ball knobber stuff south, and we know about the hanging in Ozark, we know about the Captain Kenny and the bald knobbers disbanding in Taney County. There were ball knobbers in Greene, there were ball knobbers in Douglas, and there were ball knobbers in Webster. Well, what happened is these ball knobber organizations were getting started, a federal judge came down and started indicting people, basically for terrorizing folks, and then murder and different things. And in those days, you served your federal sentence in county jail. The federal paid the county to, punish you. So until I had access to the Marshfield, I thought, well, nobody has the Marshfield Chronicle. I don't know where to get them. Don't know what happened to them. Well, I've got access to it, but that year is not on there. 1887 is not available. So if you have a Marshfield Chronicle newspaper or an old Marshfield newspaper prior to 1920, let's say, get it to the museum and let them get a copy of it. Let them scan it, because that's just something, if we could fill in some of those gaps, it's just it's just such a great resource.
So we had the Marshfield Mail and the Marshfield Chronicle both in the late 1800s.
Oh, we had a whole host of papers.
Had other
we
papers?
had the Democrat. We had the Courier. We had I want to say Farm and Home, but that's not right. It's Farm and something. We had, there was probably about 8 newspapers all told.
And
the Chronicle and the Mail are the only ones that survive in volume.
Okay. And when did the Chronicle then cease?
The Chronicle ceased in the early 20s.
Early 20s.
The Marshfield Mail comes out in 1894, I believe, and it is online up until 1945, with very few missing. I mean, there's some missing ones, but very few missing ones. The Dick Cullen lynching, for instance, the picture of Dick Cullen, all of those somebody used them at some point and took them and never put them back.
Is that right?
All of those Marshfield Chronicles are gone. So I don't have, I'm like, where's the 3rd, 10th, and 17th of March, 1892? You should be here.
Right.
And they're not. So if you have a Marshfield Chronicle, I implore you, we don't want it. We want to make a copy of it. If you have one that you think we already have, bring it down anyway, because some of them are so faded we can't read them.
Right.
So
you work hand in hand with the Historical Society on many of these projects, I'm assuming.
Sort of.
Yeah.
We've helped with the history walk around the square. I've done that several times, which is a fun thing. And tonight we're going to work on the cemetery walk.
Sure.
Explore some of the hidden characters of Marshfield you may not know about.
Yeah. That should be interesting. I'll try to make it over there about 6 o'clock. 5 or 6, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. About an hour then.
Yeah, there.
Something like that.
Thereabouts.
Well, champ, we got 5 minutes.
We got 5 minutes.
Goes by fast.
Well, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I just really,
I can't believe we've got
I appreciate you
Well,
coming.
we talked. We had something we were going to talk about. We had a gentleman who inquired about the stockade
Yes,
on the
yes.
square in Marshfield.
Greg Wadley, who's actually married to my cousin Lucinda, does a lot of historic research. Does a lot with the Frisco Trail. He's a former worked for the railroad, I believe, and
His
retired.
father did too. He's a second generation railroad man.
And so he's done a lot of research on and doing more on Webster County, even I understand. And so on Facebook, many of you may have seen his post asking about the fort, the stockade that was at Marshfield, at the square, and I did not know about it, but Champ does. So talk just a little bit about that.
Well, so what I know is I know very little. I do know that when they were digging out what would be in the middle of Marshall Street to put in the fuel tank for the service station, which is Linda Lott's office
Right
now, that they dug down and they dug into timbers and such. And the stockade was the stockade was a safe house, is basically what it was. It was timbers set in the ground and big thick boards nailed to it. There was a water mill at the end of Mill Street, and I believe it was used for both timber and for it could be hooked up to multiple things.
Right.
And so they built this thing, I guess, out of real thick lumber, and they had munitions stored in it. There was a home guard around here, and they kept things in. But the basic thing was, if somebody came around, to go run in there, which didn't make any sense at all because Joe Shelby burned it first thing, so it wouldn't have been a good place to hide out. But when that raid came through here, they burned that stockade, they burned the fort at Sand Springs, and then they went over and they burned little old Waldo, which wasn't much of a town anyway, north of Seymour. And this was on their way. Actually, they burned Waldo, came up from the south.
This would have been one of the Civil War battles then?
Yes, this is when they ended up Battle of Springfield.
Okay.
In the winter, December and January,
About the Battle of
62,
Hartville.
63.
Was it in the same run of battles?
So the Battle of Hartville was another time.
Okay.
They came through, joined up, and then went over to Hartville. And I'd have to look up exactly which time and place was which. But suffice to say, you had several instances of the Civil War here in the county where the Confederates were operating the mill and the Home Guard went and ran them out. They were grinding grain.
The Home Guard would have been part of the Missouri militia, I'm assuming, like the Missouri National Guard.
There's the enrolled Missouri militia, and there was the Home Guards. The Home Guards were county-based, and they
Just
elected
locals.
Yeah. Noah Hampton was in charge at one point of the Home Guards. He was a colonel in charge. And it was really more of a voluntary...
Yeah.
It was sort of like the fire department.
Right. like on Green Acres when you see the locals, the local fire department put their hat and coat on, and Mr. Drucker's the captain, and so forth. Yeah.
Grab your musket and your blue coat, and we're all going to get shot at.
I think I talked about this on one of the shows, but my 3 great-grandfather and 2 great-grandfather both were part of the Missouri militia from Dallas County. They were set up by counties. So they were the Missouri militia of Dallas County or whatever. That was their home base or whatever. And they both fought in the Battle of Sand Springs and survived and so forth. But
and see, there wasn't really much of a battle. They had a small howitzer out there you pull behind horses, and it was a stockade. And I think they shot at one another for a little while, and then they tried to throw the cannon in the spring. Yeah. And then it scattered. These weren't professional soldiers by any stretch of the Confederates that came through by that point were, but these were basically local farmers that were just trying to keep law and order in the meantime.
Sure. That's really interesting. So I really had not ever heard that. However, I do recall when they did replace that tank or re-poured the concrete on top. I don't remember being there the day they dug the tank up, but I do remember the new concrete being poured there. sometime in the 70s when I was a young lad, or maybe even the late 60s, and because it had a sway to it when you pulled up there to get your gas, and that was a new piece of concrete in that area that you're talking about. But you're saying that the actual stockade was first discovered like in the 20s when they actually put that first tank in the ground, probably.
I think it was more like the 40s or the 50s.
Okay.
Because that service station was there until what?
Oh, it was there till probably close to the 80s, late 70s.
Late 70s. And
Yeah.
I don't remember
And
it.
then
I don't remember it. I remember the one where Hoover's office is.
Yes,
Open, but,
yes.
I don't remember it. But
after it quit being a service station, J&I Automotive moved in there and built their starters and stuff. Yeah, they sure did for a while. They built their new building.
I always heard that when they dug in there, they found it, and they found some munitions scattered.
Yeah,
but nothing really.
Which Johnny Brooks was around because his uncle Charles owned that building, way up until later. I mean, and he owned the Ritz when the miners bought it too.
Yeah,
Meredith bought it. The Brooks family owned that, so Johnny would probably know about that.
If you have a Civil War tale you want to share, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
So you can go over and check me out on Facebook and drop me a line, or
and I think Logan, you put his Facebook or his email on. Yeah. It's on this site. If you logged in under YouTube or under my Facebook that Logan posted at the beginning of the show, he's got Champ's email on there as well. So, but yes, please contact us. Any information you might have on any of these stories, Civil War history, even the history of Marshfield, we'd love to have that. Also, I'll make an invitation if any of you would like to come on and be a guest. If you have any historic information you want to share or talk about growing up in Marshfield, Webster County, we would certainly love to have you. We'll be scheduling that. But it's 2 minutes after 2, Champ.
We went 2 minutes over.
Thank you so much. Good luck tonight, and
appreciate it.
We'll have you back.
Appreciate what you're doing here.
Well, thank you. We want to document history, so this is exactly what we're trying to do. So we'll have you back soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.